We're concerned about climate change from several perspectives. When you think about national security, but both national defense and also the security of our homeland. So first of all, we look at the impacts of climate change, things like sea level rise, coastal flooding, changes in the coastal environment of nations around the world at the time of growing populations that can certainly create a lot of geopolitical instability as we see more and more scarce resources, food, water, and even habitability, resulting in possible displacement of population, wanting to move to maybe a nation next door or go after their resources. So you can see high potential for conflict in the future. If we can understand that now and get in front of it and help using science and technology to help to sort of mitigate these awful outcomes, then we have a chance to change the world now. So we're looking at from that perspective. We also look at our own military infrastructure along our coastlines in the U.S. and even overseas. We're very vulnerable to sea level rise, coastal flooding issues. And so we need to work with the local, regional, state, and other federal planners and the engineers to make sure we're going down the right path to shore up our installations or make the right decisions for readiness in the future. And it's not just sea level rise and coastal flooding. There are other issues of catastrophic and extreme weather events, droughts, floods for military installations all over the world, even away from our coastline. So in the U.S. military, taking a look at all that, it's a fact-based analysis as we see things change, trying to make the right decisions at the right time to make sure that we're ready for the future. Experience has been very educational. I'm actually inspired by this group of bipartisan mayors and county commissioners, council members who have come together, and just hearing them talk about their understanding of the problems they're facing along the coastlines and other problems as well related to our changing climate. It's, they understand it. They don't, we don't need to get down the details of blame and the scientific necessity of cause. They're dealing with reality. And sometimes I think that's lost on the folks up in Washington, D.C. I wish that our senior leadership of our nation and even a lot of our inland population could hear from these coastal areas, these coastal towns, and understand the challenges that they're facing and how motivated they are to take action now and in the future. And so it's really an inspirational. I'm enthused by what I've seen, and I compliment them in their willingness to come to a venue like this and get the issues on the table. In the military, we're just part of a larger national, even state and regional organization. So you look at one of our military bases, whether it's Norfolk or maybe it's an Air Force base down on the Gulf Coast, or maybe it's an Army base or Marine base over in the desert somewhere. As we prepare for and react to changing weather, climate events, we rely on others. Whether it's where you live, it's where you get your power, it's where you get your water, it's the sewer, it's all these things are actually, it's all a network of capabilities that we have to be part of a team as we plan for the future. So we certainly want to partner with state, federal, local governments, engineers, and city planners to make sure that we're all going in the right direction together, sort of thing, going to that level, going from little kid soccer to high school, college, and professional soccer at some point to make sure we are an effective team. So the task force was established back in 2009. I was the second, the second admiral to be put in charge of the task force. My predecessor, retired Rear Admiral Dave Titley, now works at Penn State, Dr. Dave Titley. He got this running back in 2009 under Admiral Gary Roughead, our Chief of Naval Operations. And we were tasked to do all the things that I've talked about. Really, we look at climate change. One of the key things for the Navy is the Arctic, a changing ocean with a lot of concern and potential for hazards up in the Arctic as more and more people move up there. There's more and more activity. Of course, we also have Russia, who's a big player in the Arctic, and there's growing, if not curiosity, maybe even concern about basically what Russia is doing around the world. The Arctic is no different. Then we take a look at, as I mentioned, what's happening with climate change and the geopolitical instability that can lead to us having to be involved in our national defense mission in the future and conflicts that may impact us down the road. Even things that are going on right now. When you look at Syria and the relations of the unrest in Syria that went back to a drought for several years and drove people into the cities where they didn't have enough food, they didn't have enough security, and they basically revolted. And then you end up with the situation that we have now. Great article by Tom Friedman on that, but certainly climate change, not the only cause, but a catalyst for conflict in that arena. Several other possibilities in the future that if we understand that now, we can mitigate those. And then the other reason is I talked about the military infrastructure. How vulnerable are we to changes in the climate and the weather and ocean hazards that those represent, and what can we do about it now? So it's really a three-pronged approach, sort of a trident of climate change preparedness and readiness is the way I look at it. Now, I would just like to say again how much I'm inspired by folks at the grassroots level here. It's really going to rely on mayors in cities and towns and state and local people partnering with the scientists at the universities in their own regions to understand the change that is happening, and they're going to have to influence the federal leadership, because I think if we don't put those two things together, we're going to end up being a little bit late to need in some of the efforts and planning we need to do for the serious problems that face us in the future. Well, that's my new job as work in the Consortium for Ocean Leadership. Part of our charter is education through schools, universities, partnering with local schools. We have a program called the National Ocean Science Bowl, where people play a quiz game, and it's a national effort. I encourage people to look at things like that, and how can we get in and educate the youth? And the youth are getting pretty smart on the actual physics of our Earth, our planet, what's happening. I think they know a lot more than my own generation, and I think they're a lot more motivated to make the right decisions and do the right things ahead. So I think we're sort of winning that battle, but it's a little bit too slow. So outreach, partnerships are key to educating the public of our nation and even around the world to the threats we face. For every older person that I find, like myself, who sort of says that, and a lot of them don't live in areas that have been impacted, or they're not seeing what's happening in places like somewhere along the East Coast. But when you look at events like Sandy, and you look at even post-Sandy, there have been several flooding events in the New York, New Jersey area not related to that superstorm. You see the days of flooding, the average water levels, we've seen them rise, and we can measure that. We measure those with tidal gauges all the time. You look at people who bought homes 30 years ago who are older, who are now seeing their backyards flooded and inundated much more often than they used to. So there are people who understand